Hey guys, it's Nico Pantua, and today I'd like to talk about some small tips and tricks that you could utilize for your poses to give them a bit more life. Now, there's many ways you can give your drawings a bit more life, or make the poses look a lot more interesting. I can talk about attitudes, performances, and all the nuances that add more flavor and spices to your poses. But I'm going to talk about some quick and easy tips that you can utilize for your own poses. Tips and tricks that I utilize when I'm drawing character poses for model sheets. The first one I want to talk about is experiment with your action line, or line of action, or gesture line, whatever you want to call it. It's so easy to come up with a pose that just feels so vertical, straight up and down oriented. Meaning that every pose just feels like it's standing, or sitting, or crouching up straight. If you want to be more bold and gestural with your drawings, I would start with a big gesture line or action line that indicates the overall flow of the drawing. So whatever pose I'm drawing, it's usually oriented to this gesture line. I'm usually thinking of the spine for my first action line since that's a primary flow. Now, you could utilize a second action line if you want to. It really depends on how you want to use this. So, for example, I could use another action line to indicate the flow of the overall arms, or another action line to indicate the twist of the legs, if there is any. Sometimes I think about the second action line as a counteract for my primary action line or my primary gesture line. So one example is, let's say I have an action line that's leaning over, but I'll have another action line to indicate there's some bit of weight that's holding that action line up. If you want, on your drawing file or drawing sheet, you can prepare a bunch of different action lines just to compose it overall with multiple different gestures and poses. And then after you've done your action line or a series of action lines, then you can start implementing your model or your character orienting to that action line. At least you already have a foundation or a placeholder for the overall gesture. Sometimes when I animate, I usually start out with a blob and put it on model later on. The blob is really just to capture the feeling, and the same thing could be done if you're just using an action line instead of a blob. A lot of people tend to forget that animating is really capturing the overall feeling or the movement or just the energy, rather than just trying to figure out every mechanical thing at the get-go. You can figure that stuff out later on. The next is to utilize contrapposto, also known as tilting the hips and shoulders to some people. Contrapposto comes from the Italian term counterpoise or pose. I'm too lazy to look it up how you pronounce it. But basically, it's something that a lot of life drawing teachers teach when they're teaching life drawing to someone who is new to drawing. It's an asymmetrical arrangement of the hips and shoulders to give a sense of weight and aliveness while keeping things balanced. So let's say I have a drawing where the figure is just standing upright. I would tilt the shoulders one way and the hips the other just to give it a sense of asymmetry and things don't look as stiff as it did before. Then this would lead me to think about the orientation of the arms and legs. If the shoulder's really high up, maybe the hand of that shoulder would be resting on the hip. With the orientation of the hips, one leg would probably be more spread out than the other. And like I said, the hand holding the hip could give a sense of weight. And to add more weight, maybe there's a counterforce. So let's say an extended leg can indicate this is a sign of tension, holding the body up. Now, we can go on about the possibilities of what the arms and legs could do, but in this case, just think about the shoulders and the hips and what you can do when you tilt it. Even think about the head. Maybe the head is tilting too. You'll see a lot of this in my sketches because for me, it's just so easy to do and it's something that gives a bit more interest to my drawings. Even though I am still thinking about acting and performance and character attitudes, at least it gives a sense of asymmetry, weight, and balance without having my drawings look stiff all the time. The next thing I want to talk about is adding a bit of subtle twists and turns to your pose. Now, this is similar to the last one I talked about, which is the orientation of the body, but having them face different directions instead of having them tilt. So an example is you could have the chest and shoulders face one direction, but the hips and the knees could be facing another, giving your pose a sense of twist and dynamism. Dynamicism? Blah, blah, blah. And you can totally play this up with your drawings to describe the twist. So let's say your characters are wearing clothes, for example. You could orient the cloth folds to the twist. If it's a character with flesh and a bit of fat, then you can think about the flesh fats, how the crease sort of bends into each other or whatnot, or how they kind of extrude, or how the costumes and accessories are affected by the twist. So the accessories could be altered. Maybe the pattern could also be twisting if the clothes have patterns on it. It just really sells the idea of solid drawing. Having twists can help describe a sense of movement, at the same time a sense of volume, like I said, without having to resort to animation if you want to have your characters feel like they're moving. Now, you could also combine the tilt of the shoulders and the hips along with twisting some body parts to really make that pose a bit more dynamic. And you know what? I would say keep playing with this, because at some point you're going to be able to come up with these very subtle but yet dynamic and alive poses without the use of reference. Next is to think about attitude and performance. You know, I said earlier I wasn't going to get into acting, attitudes, and performance, but I think when you are drawing poses for your characters, you should start thinking about getting into your character. Now, I'm not going to tell you about how you should draw acting poses since they are subjective, you know, based on culture and based on how we grew up. The way we express anger is going to be different to how another person expresses anger from another part of the world. So I want you to problem solve that on your own. Act it out and pay attention to what the mechanics of your body is doing. I know when I act things out, for example, my shoulders play a huge role. My shoulders and my chest and my back play a huge role in dictating the attitude. A character more relaxed and loose might drop their shoulders, more relaxed. You know, I'm doing that right now. Whereas a character that's more shy, uptight, and maybe embarrassed, maybe their shoulders are a bit more perked up. Maybe they're more stiff and timid. So, you know, you stiffen up when things are a bit nerve-wracking, you know? So that's just me. You could use shoulders to show a character being a bit defensive, maybe using the shoulders as a guard or shield. This can translate to, you know, the rest of the body too, of how you're going to utilize that body to show what this character is feeling, what this character is thinking. If a character doesn't want to think but is all about pure gut, you know, maybe they're driving forward with their body, whereas a character that is more precise in intellect would lead with their head. It's one of those things I constantly think about when acting out my animation or just studying my reference. So those were just some small tips that I had when it comes to making your stiff poses a little less stiff and a bit more interesting visually. Whether it's playing around with the orientation of the shoulders and the hips, whether it's pushing some of those poses, and even thinking about performances and attitudes can help bring life to your poses. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about these ones is because they're quite easy to comprehend, but there are endless variations in how you can bring life to your drawings. Maybe I'll talk about it some other time, but for now, bye. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.